Hello and welcome to Global News Today. I'm your host, Michael Prendergast. And coming up on today's show, we have a very special interview with the former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow. Thanks for joining me, John. I want to start this interview by asking, what were you like as a teenager? Were you already politically minded?
I was politically minded, Michael, from the age of 16. Before that, I was obsessed with tennis and David Bowie to the exclusion of virtually all else. At the age of 16, my political consciousness was awakened. And at that time, partly because I had Conservative parents and partly because I was living under what I regarded as an extremely substandard Labour government, I was sympathetic to the Conservative Party. But although I eventually became a Conservative Member of Parliament, I recovered from the affliction some considerable time ago.
And so having Conservative parents, and then you obviously were a Conservative MP, did you ever find yourself as rebellious growing up?
Yes, I was certainly rebellious at school. For example, I was rebellious principally against teachers, most of whom were either supporters of the Callaghan Labour government or Bennites, that is to say, left-wing critics of it. And I was profoundly opposed to their views. So I was rebellious against their left-wingery, if you like, and I was mildly rebellious at home. But I wouldn't say that my youth was defined by rebellion. I would say it was defined by the particularity, perhaps even obsessive particularity, of wanting to spend almost every waking hour that I wasn't at school playing tennis or watching football. So I suppose that was a bit odd. So in that sense, I was odd, and in other respects, I'm no doubt odd. But I don't think I would say that my childhood was characterized by permanent rebellion. Not really. Modest rebellion.
Yes, of course. And I wonder at what age did you decide that you would like to enter the political sphere?
I think at the point at which my political consciousness was awakened, that is to say at the age of 16, I did some rather heavy-duty thinking at that point, and fairly soon decided that one day, having doubtless made a living in various forms for a period, I would like to be a Member of Parliament. I could empathise with those who were representing a constituency, standing up for causes, fighting for beliefs, battling for their convictions. So really, I suppose, from the age of 16 onwards, my long-term goal was to become a Member of Parliament. It was an enormous privilege to serve as a Member of Parliament for 22 years and behold, to hold the office of Speaker for over a decade. But all good things, and from my point of view, they were very good and privileged opportunities, come to an end. And now I'm enjoying a different balance in my life. And I've got more time to do other things, more time to see my family, more time to play sport, more time to read books, more time, I suppose, to catch up on the things which the all-consuming nature of a parliamentary career renders very difficult, if not, in fact, impossible. And
we will get into that in the future. To touch back on, who inspired you at that time? Was it like previous speakers, or you had a lot of heavyweight politicians at that time? Who in particular inspired you?
In my youth, I was not inspired by speakers of the House of Commons, because obviously at that point you don't think about the role of the Speaker. Hardly anybody starts out in politics thinking in terms of becoming Speaker or wanting to model him or herself on the Speaker. No, the person at that time who inspired me was Margaret Thatcher, who was leader of the Conservative opposition and the Member of Parliament for the constituency where I went to school. So she was, if you will, a source of inspiration and a role model. And to this day, I think there are many very fine accomplishments to her credit. But I came over a period to recoil from the Conservative Party because of the terrible errors that I felt it made in government. And although I think there was much of which Margaret Thatcher and her government could be proud, there were also deep wounds inflicted upon British society, great divisions in our country, a huge chasm between the haves and the have-nots, an absence of any real commitment to social justice at all, and frankly, public services that were starved of investment and denied any sort of recognition or respect. So if you're asking me, did I admire her? I did. Do I regard Thatcherism as the basis of a suitable future or present politics? Absolutely not. I am what I would describe these days as a candid friend of the Labour government. I was very pleased when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister last year. I think that the period of 14 years of Conservative government was as bad as any government in my memory, and I'm very glad that it came to an end. But of course, the legacy was bequeathed to Keir Starmer was a very, very challenging, even toxic legacy with which he and his colleagues are still having to wrestle and will probably do so for some appreciable time to come. There are many challenges. They can be tackled, but they aren't easy and they won't be quickly met.
So in order to go back to Thatcher, did you see Tony Blair as a solution to Thatcherism?
I didn't at the time see Tony Blair as a solution to Thatcherism because at the point at which, Michael, I came into the House of Commons in 1997, I was still a strong Conservative and I greatly admired Margaret Thatcher. I was very hostile to the Labour government and indeed to the premiership of Tony Blair. So I certainly didn't regard him as a solution to Thatcherism. But of course, with time and with the record that somebody establishes, it is possible for an observer to change his or her mind. And I readily admit, and have done so many times, that I changed my mind about Tony Blair. I started with a very negative opinion of him. But I must say that of all the prime ministers alongside whom I served in the House of Commons, Tony Blair was by a country mile the best. I was there from 1997 until 2019, and Blair was very easily the best in terms of clarity of thought, strategic direction, ability to prioritize, facility at communicating with people. In all of those respects and many others, Tony Blair was a consummate practitioner of the art of politics.
And it must have been a very exciting time to enter politics in 1997. How was that experience for you, being a young MP, your first time in Parliament? I think everyone at home always wonders what that's like.
It is incredibly exciting when you first arrive in the House. You're struck by the enormity of the history of the institution of which you've suddenly become a part. There are all sorts of rules and conventions and niceties and courtesies to which you have to become accustomed, of which you were completely ignorant beforehand. So it is a very steep learning curve, but I was exhilarated to be there. After all, you don't normally decide you want to be a member of Parliament and then get there within a year or 2 years or 3 years. For most people who aspire to get into the House of Commons, it is a case of it being a marathon and not a sprint. And that was certainly true, Michael, in my case. I stood 3 times before getting elected. I got elected at my 3rd attempt, having at 2 previous elections been an unsuccessful candidate. So when I got elected in 1997, it was, if you like, the end game for me after a period of 18 years in which I had aspired to arrive in the House of Commons. So if I can capture the point for your viewers, it was a long-held ambition finally realized. Once you're there, though, you have to recognize that you're not there in order to puff yourself up and say, oh, isn't this marvelous? I'm a member of Parliament. isn't this a fantastic thing for me? It is a career of public service, and your responsibility then is to deliver to the people who entrusted you with their confidence and the responsibility to deliver. And for 22 years, I did my best to serve the people of Buckingham and to speak truth to power. And I would emphasize that concept of speak truth to power. I was never in office as a government minister. I was in opposition as an opposition member of Parliament, and then I served as Speaker. Sometimes people don't quite understand, and therefore the point is worth underlining. The Speaker is at the epicenter of the political system, and the Speaker is, in one sense, the most senior parliamentarian as the chair of proceedings, but the Speaker, very importantly, is not a member of the government. The Speaker is independent of, separate from, unconnected with, and owing no allegiance to any political party, and certainly to neither government nor to opposition. The role of the Speaker is to try to facilitate the House of Commons institutionally and members of Parliament individually. I felt that my job was to keep order, encourage people to take part, and try to cut down on the number of people who had to be excluded altogether as a result of bad behaviour. My role was to ensure that Parliament had its say and that Parliament had its way.
Yes. Going back to your point, speaking truth to power, you had some incredible alumni in 1997, the likes of Tony Benn, some huge characters in the House of Commons then. Is there anyone who stood out in your mind? And what was it like sitting across from Tony Benn?
Wow, that's an extremely good and probing question, Michael. Yes, there were people who stood out. And first and foremost, I would say the best public speaker I heard in my time in Parliament was the late Tony Benn. In terms of the capacity to captivate and almost, if you will, Michael, to mesmerize the House of Commons with the force of his argument and the eloquence of his presentation, there was nobody better than Tony Blair. Tony Benn was unbelievably fluent. He was definitely the best public speaker I heard in my time. That's not quite the same as being the best debater. Tony was a brilliant speaker, both from a text and more particularly the most brilliant extempore speaker. He could speak without a note for any length of time, and he was extraordinarily powerful. As a debater, I would say he was not quite as good. He would always be polite to people.
Who was the best?
Tried to interrupt them. I beg your pardon?
Who was the best debater?
The best debater was Robin Cook. The late Robin Cook was not the platform orator that Tony Benn was. I don't think that Robin quite played to the emotions in the way that Tony Benn did. He wasn't quite as effective an orator. But in terms of quickness of wit and sharpness in debate, Robin Cook was the best I ever heard. He was phenomenally quick. If you were going to interrupt him, if you were going to joust with him, if you wanted to issue a challenge to him, you'd better have your facts right, otherwise you'd be demolished in a nanosecond. I would say that the only rival I heard to Robin Cook on the Conservative side really was Ken Clarke. Ken Clarke was a formidable debater as well, an immensely engaging personality, in some ways a much more attractive politician than Robin, with an appeal to people beyond what Robin had to offer. But the best speaker was Benn and the best debater was Robin Cook. That's my experience. Other people will no doubt give you different views, but I've got a very keen recollection of the eloquence of Tony Benn and of the formidable debating prowess of Robin Cook, and I'll never forget either.
And even for yourself, having a partisan role and then becoming Speaker, having to be completely unbiased, how did you find that transition?
Well, it was perfectly doable. People often say, well, didn't you find it difficult because previously you had a party allegiance, all of a sudden you find yourself in the role of the impartial referee or umpire? Isn't that impossibly difficult to countenance, let alone as an expectation or duty to fulfill? And the answer is not really. And I think there are two reasons why I didn't find it difficult. The first is that it goes with the job. It's absolutely expected that the Speaker is fair-minded in the chair and treats members on either side of the House equally, trying to facilitate debate and give people opportunities to take part. That's the first point. It's written into the job description. The second point is that if you weren't on a day-to-day basis fair, you wouldn't last 2 minutes in the job, because these days, of course, Parliament is not only televised, but people are watching on all sorts of social networking sites. People are tweeting almost instantly their reactions to what is being said and done, and everything you say and do is noticed and subject to evaluation. So for those two reasons, the reason of ethics and the reason of pragmatism and visibility, you have to be fair. That's not to say, Michal, that I wasn't criticised. Of course I was criticised. Every speaker is criticised. People individually sometimes think if you haven't called them to speak, that you've got a downer on them, that you're irritated with them, that you've got a grudge against them. That happens all the time. People can be prickly and sensitive, and you sometimes have to explain to people, I didn't call you because you've already spoken 3 times this week, or I didn't call you to speak in this debate because there are already enough speakers and we haven't got enough time, or whatever. And now and again, as I say, I would have been and was criticised for particular judgments that I made on individual matters. That, as I say, goes with the turf of being Speaker. But if you're asking me, was it difficult to assume the mantle of the umpire? No, it wasn't. I felt I'd said all I wanted to say by way of the party political debate, of which, frankly, I'd become rather tired. And yet I loved Parliament, and I wanted to make a contribution. And I thought I could as Speaker. And I'm eternally grateful to my colleagues, because for all my faults and failings, which we haven't got time comprehensively to cover in this short interview, I was fortunate to be elected and re-elected as Speaker no fewer than 4 times, and to serve for over a decade. So I suppose my defence against critics is, well, I did stay in post when I could have been dislodged for over a decade. So I must have been doing something right.
Yes, and I think having a thick skin, because having to deal with that level of criticism, how did you personally deal with this?
Well, most of the time, the answer is don't take it personally. Most of the time, I hope I didn't rise to it. There was a lot of criticism, of course, in the media, and I'd much rather have a raucous, abrasive, mordant, nasty, resentful, vicious press than to have a state-controlled press. So I don't complain about that. So insofar as criticism was articulated through the media, well, that just goes with the turf. But most of the outlets of the media, if I may say so, the written media, are tomorrow's fish and chip paper, and therefore it doesn't really matter. As far as individual criticisms were concerned from colleagues, I think my answer, Michal, is where the criticism was valid, I tried to learn from it. Where it was just abuse, I ignored it. Now and again, because we're all human and to err is human, I reacted to it, or I got too annoyed with somebody, or when I was tired, I would now and again make a mistake that if I had been less tired and more focused, I wouldn't have made. So if you're asking me, is the record unblemished? Did I always get it right? Can I say that I didn't make mistakes in the course of a decade in the chair and sitting in there for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hours? No, of course not. We all make mistakes, and to err, as I say, is human. But I hope on the whole, people felt this is a guy who is competent in the role. He knows what he's doing. He's not a gibbering wreck. He is familiar with the procedures of the House, and he's on the side of Parliament institutionally, and in particular, the cheerleader of the backbenchers. I wanted the backbenchers to have maximum opportunity to question, probe, scrutinise, challenge, and where necessary, expose the errors of omission and commission of the government of the day.
What was your toughest day in the chair?
What was my toughest day in the chair?
Or week?
Sorry?
Or week?
or my toughest day in the chair, or my toughest week. Nothing in particular springs to mind. I mean, I suppose towards the end, when there was a high octane atmosphere in the chamber and tensions were running extremely high between the government and the opposition in relation to Brexit, that was quite challenging. But you're really operating, Michael, in the moment. You're sitting in the chair having to decide who to call to speak, what the time limit will be, how much time remains, how you're going to utilize it, what the next business is, etc., etc. So you don't really have time constantly, or indeed often at all, to internalize matters and to sit there reflecting upon your own situation. I was challenged, I remember, at one point by people who disapproved of rulings I'd made on amendments to government motions. And I think I faced something like an hour on my feet responding to critical questions. I think that was quite a tough day. I can't remember exactly which day it was, but I've got a feeling it was in the early part of 2019, might have been January 2019. So I think that was quite tough. But I tended to feel, well, I think I've got right on my side. I know why I think what I think and why I've decided what I've decided. And I've explained to the House why I've made the rulings I have made. So it wasn't as though I was confused or uncertain. I knew my own terrain. I knew my own ground. I knew the force of the argument that I had to deploy. And then it was almost just a question, Michael, of physical stamina, that people wanted to ask question after question after question of a critical kind, and I had to keep jumping up and down responding to those questions. But I've got quite strong knee muscles, and I wasn't greatly perturbed by the experience of having to stand up and down for an hour or so. That really isn't, in the great scheme of things, very burdensome. A lot of people do very much more demanding things for a living than I had to do.
And to move on to Keir Starmer, since we last spoke a year ago, the political landscape in the UK has changed enormously. You've got Reform are absolutely surging in the polls. They had a huge victory on the council level recently. What are your thoughts on that?
Reform is doing very well, and Nigel Farage has made huge gains. Those are facts. They cannot be denied or gainsaid. And I don't seek to rubbish or belittle Nigel Farage. He's a much bigger figure now than when he stood unsuccessfully against me in the Buckingham constituency in May 2010. I was able to see him off pretty comfortably at that point. But no, he is a bigger figure, and he has made a serious pitch. Why are Reform doing better? First, I think there is widespread voter disillusionment. We are still experiencing a cost of living crisis. People are unhappy. They do feel deflated. They can't necessarily see an immediate prospect of greatly improved living standards. So that is one problem, and he has taken advantage of it, as an opposition politician is perfectly entitled to do. The second factor, very much in his favour, is the truly chronic weakness of the official Conservative opposition. I don't wish to be unkind to somebody who is already in deep trouble, but Kemi Badenoch, I'm afraid, is completely out of her depth. I feel embarrassed for Kemi when I hear her perform in the chamber against the government. She frequently chooses the wrong issue. She speaks badly, and one often concludes it would be better if she didn't bother speaking at all. And so she's not in any serious sense a threat to the government. Conservative support is declining, not increasing. So what's happened is that...
Could we see a coalition, John?
...capitalised on her weakness and the government's difficulties.
Could we see a coalition between the Conservatives and Reform, and could we see Nigel Farage as Prime Minister?
I don't think there will be a coalition between Reform and the Conservative Party, and the reason I don't think so is that whatever the Conservative Party thinks is relatively immaterial, to be honest. Nigel Farage doesn't want a deal with the Conservative Party, as far as I can tell. He wants to destroy the Conservative Party. He wants a crack at the top job himself. He aspires to be in government, which is a perfectly legitimate aspiration. And I cannot see any possibility whatsoever of a deal with the Conservatives on the part of Farage before a general election. I think he wants a clear run at the general election. He wants to destroy the Conservatives and, if possible, to replace Labour. Could he end up as Prime Minister? He could, but I don't think he will. I think that he has very skillfully exploited the government's problems and the paucity, almost the non-existence of the Conservative opposition. And he has appealed successfully to a very widespread discontent on immigration policy, on the state of our public services, on the absence of a feel-good factor. I think that the difficulty he's got is manifold. First of all, the electoral system is against him unless he can command consistently 30% plus public support. And I think that's going to be difficult for him over the next 3 to 4 years, which is the timescale within which we have to do this matter. Secondly, I think that he's got to have a much wider policy pitch than just banging on about the EU, Brexit, and immigration. And most people haven't got a clue what he would do about other issues. And the third problem he's got is that although he's a talented demagogue, he's a divisive character, and he's got an army of political novices who've just taken over councils across the country. And if they make an almighty Horlicks of it in the running of local authority affairs in places right across the UK, there will be an electoral price to pay for that. So there are all those factors which are working against him. And there's one other very important consideration we hold, if I may say so, and it's this. Yes, the government's in difficulty, but the government is still in power. Keir Starmer and his colleagues are trying to grapple with the issues this country faces, trying to tackle the cost of living crisis, forging better links, trade, security, and in terms of travel facilitation with the European Union, dealing in a statesmanlike way with the predictable turbulence of a Trump administration, trying to fashion better trade agreements around the world. Really, Keir Starmer isn't the sort of politician that Nigel Farage is. He's not a tub-thumping public speaker. He's an experienced practitioner of statecraft. And that, I think, is going to be potentially to his advantage in the next few years. So nothing's certain. And you've noticed in this interview that I have not rushed to rubbish Reform UK. I just think that although they're doing well at the moment, they don't have a clear policy programme. They are appealing to the discontented. They know what they're against, but they haven't fashioned a credo. They haven't got a clear narrative for the direction of the country as a whole. I think Labour, in many ways, remains very much in touch with people's basic values. People want a strong National Health Service. They want an effective state education system. They want a growing economy. And if I may say so, people want, even people who vote Reform, want better relations between Britain and our nearest neighbour, the EU. Neither
well, obviously,
they want that.
There's been a trademark deal, obviously, that's gotten over the line. Obviously, the Reform are going to jump on this. Obviously, Nigel Farage has spoken extensively about the damage to the UK fisheries as well. They see it as a betrayal of Brexit. What are your thoughts on that?
It's not a betrayal of Brexit at all. Nigel can't escape from the fact that the project which has defined his political career, the achievement of Brexit, has been a colossal failure. This is the greatest failure of British foreign policy in the post-war period. It's a fact. It's happened. Labour isn't seeking to reverse it, and Keir Starmer has made it clear that we have to accept that that was the explicit view of the British people. But most people can see that Brexit has had an extremely damaging effect on the size of the British economy and the living standards of our people, on our trade performance, and so on. Farage isn't much bothered about that because his belief in Brexit isn't about trade. It's about this abstract notion of sovereignty. Michal, what most people want is for us to be able to export our goods, our sanitary products, our phytosanitary products, our animal products, our plant products. People want to be able to see the growth to British jobs from being able to open markets to our food and drink industries and so on. This is what people want to see, and this is what this agreement delivers. And it delivers enhanced cooperation on defence and security, never more important now than in the light of Russian aggression in Ukraine and so on. So if Mr. Farage wants to go screaming from the rooftops about sovereignty, 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 he can do so. But I think what most people are concerned about is what's the state of the economy? Can we export our goods? Have we got decent relations with others around the world and some genuine influence? The Brexiteers, I'm afraid, are living in a time warp. They are completely out of kilter with the requirements of a modern British economy. We've got to be able to trade. That means forging agreements. And trade negotiations are, of course, Michal, about compromise. You get some things you want, and you have to give other countries things that they want. That is the nature of a negotiation. Now, I think deep down, Mr. Farage knows that, but it suits him just to be relentlessly critical. As for Kemi Badenoch, I think Mr. Farage said recently that she and the Conservatives were a waste of space. Well, it's very rare for me to accuse Mr. Farage of an understatement, but there I think he is guilty of a serious understatement. Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives are purely talking to themselves. They are in an echo chamber. The country is simply not listening to them. So the fight is on, but the Labour government has got 3 to 4 years in which to take advantage of this trade and security and improved travel arrangement agreement with the European Union, to build on the trade agreement that it's recently secured with India, to fashion the best possible arrangements it can with the Trump administration in the United States, and to get on with the important business of delivering services of quality available to people when they need them.
Yes, in order to go back to one of your points, so has all hope of Britain ever rejoining the EU, is that dashed?
I don't think you, in politics, can ever say something is determined forever, because, of course, the very nature of a belief in sovereignty is that a government can reverse the policy of its predecessor.
Would you like to see it?
No parliament can bind its successor. I make no bones about the fact that I think that exiting the European Union was a mistake, both economically and politically, but I accept that despite considerable evidence of buyer's remorse, a lot of voters who now think that it's been very bad, people don't want to go through the ructions and travails and long-winded, protracted process of reviewing all of that all over again. That is not on the table. That's not what anybody is asking for at the moment. It's not what the government is committed to deliver. What the government is saying is, look, we're outside the European Union, but we want to have decent, frictionless trade. We want to have proper security cooperation. We would like to develop a youth mobility scheme, and we want people to be able to travel easily to other countries through airports without the enormous difficulties which travellers are experiencing at the present. And it is the great benefit of the agreement that's just been reached that those achievements have been notched up. Real progress has been made. Now, is it the be-all and end-all? Is it a panacea for our problems? No, of course it's not. It's not the final word. All progress in politics, in negotiation, in life is incremental. There can always be another day and further issues that have to be broached and resolved. But I suppose what I would say to your audience is the situation as a result of these agreements that Keir Starmer's government has achieved is much better than it was before they were achieved. And it's all very well for the Conservatives coruscatingly to criticise. That bunch of jokers was in power for 14 years, and they made an absolutely hideous mess of matters. They've got a brass neck to grumble that what has been achieved so far isn't enough. Isn't enough? Keir Starmer's only been in power for less than 11 months, and he's achieved a great deal more in that time than Kemi and her colleagues were ever able to achieve. So I think, frankly, the period of silence from the Conservatives would be suitable and widely welcomed.
Unfortunately, we're just out of time. So, John Bercow, former Speaker of the House of Commons, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
That's all we have time for today on Global News Today. I've been Michael Prendergast, and be sure to tune in again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews.